Welcome to The Great Cover Up with Ann McMan. I'm Sheena, and Ann is joining me today to talk about covers. Ann, thank you.
Thank you for asking me to participate. I'm thrilled.
Episode 3, and we're talking about finalizing the cover. At what point do you know that the cover is done?
From my perspective, that's a really interesting question because there actually really is a process for that. Usually when I start working on a cover, and I don't send these all to the author, which is probably they would love it if I would, but I don't. I'll do several different covers, like several different approaches to get at the one that I think is right. And I will generally make a decision about the right kind of typeface first. Here is how I want to present the title, and this is what I want to do with the letters. And then I work on finding exactly the right kind of image to get, or combination. In my case, it's usually combination of images. I tend to take several images and marry them together in some way. I'm a big fan of that. I kind of like sort of being able to see through one image to another, like that kind of thing. And so I'll try several approaches. And usually when I know that I'm done, when I think I'm done, is when I take enough away that I've got it sort of pared down to the most essential elements. And sometimes you have to start with a whole lot more and then start peeling stuff off to get to that perfect place. So when I feel like I've come up with something where the graphic image that I've created or found or made is working perfectly with the way the title is presented and that the things are in the right positions. Because when you're doing graphic design, you have to appreciate that there's an editorial function that has to come into play. It isn't just what's the best picture and, where do you put the author's name? You have to kind of look at the composition in a way to try to anticipate the way a viewer is going to get the information. What do you want them to see first when they look at the cover? And there are some design tricks that dictate how that works. Generally, if you have something white, your eye automatically goes to the white thing first. So I try to use that. I might put, depending on who it is, I might put the author's name in white. I might pick one word of the, something like that. So when I feel like I've reached the place where there isn't anything else I can do to it or take away, that I feel like, okay, there it is. This is exactly right. And then I'll send it off and wait. And I found that when I hear back immediately, it's usually because I got it right. And the person is really happy. And that generally the longer it takes to get feedback, it could just be that, I have so much damage that I don't understand delayed gratification. It makes no sense to me. I do things immediately, right? So I have almost no appreciation for people who have, the self-control or, thoughtful process where they can have a reaction and then think, well, I'm going to live with this for a day or two. I mean, they're kind of like objects in a museum to me. I don't understand that. But, I've found that the longer it takes for somebody to get back to me, that usually it's going to be because the cover just ain't a working.
They probably have to sit and figure out why they don't like the cover and what feedback they can give to you.
Yeah, that's true too. And, and I think I also have to own that, I have a pretty strong personality and it's probably not always easy for people to come back and go, yeah, this really sucks. I really don't, I don't like this, so I think sometimes people are, just trying to sort of let me down gently, but, a lot of times they just have a better sense of what they think represents the material than I took away from what they told me.
Do they get to see any progress between talking to you initially and the end product that you send them?
Nope. I just don't share that. And I'll tell you the reason. I think a lot of that comes from having a 40-year career as a professional designer, because within the business, and any designer will tell you this, even the really like you could interview Chip Kidd, and he will tell you that if he sends several approaches to somebody, they will always pick the worst one. Always. Or every designer's nightmare, they'll say, I really like the picture on this one and the type on this one, but I like this color. I call that the ransom note method of design. Where you sit down with scissors and a bunch of magazines and you cut stuff out, and try to put, so I'm so working with me is not always a cakewalk, cause I don't do that. I'm not going to send you, here are the 7 or 8 approaches I'm thinking about. I don't even send people things like, here are the images I found, and I think one of these might work. Is there one you like better? I don't even do that. I mean, I'm actually really sort of awful. I just kind of mess with it, and I come up with what I think based on what they told me and based on the research I did and based, what I know about the genre and the other books they've written. I try to come up with what I think is going to, and I generally find that if you have trouble getting answers from people about those questions on the front end, all you have to do to get them to tell you what you really need to know is send them something that doesn't work. And then suddenly they are so articulate, about exactly what they want in the ways this miss the mark.
Do you ever, if you're struggling to get the information you need out of your client, do you ever send them like a dummy cover?
I have done that, honestly. There have been times where it has been so difficult to really get, I'll continue to push and ask and say, I need you to tell me what this book is about, and all I get is a plot summary. And if I push and say, well, no, I understand that, I get that this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens. But like, what is the overarching message of the book? What is it about? And sometimes I just can't tease that out of them. So there have been occasions where I've just made something and sent it, because a lot of times that really does work. People it's like suddenly they find the vocabulary once they see something, to kind of say, no, it isn't this, it's this. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Okay, but you know why that happens? It's because you have a superpower that not all of us have.
I wasn't going to say that.
No, but you do.
Yeah, no.
There are people who can visualize something from thin air, and then there are people who can't. And I know this because I have worked with a lot of people who can visualize something from thin air, like yourself, and I am not one of those people. So if somebody describes something to me, then unless I'm actually looking at it, I actually can't really picture it in my head unless I've got some sort of reference.
I wonder if if I would be really well served to you'll have to charge me for this. It's like therapy. Like if I would be really well served to try to learn that, about a person I'm working with, like, I don't know how to, like, what's your learning style? Like, how do you maybe ask if I'm going to do a cover for you, and say, Sheena, what would be most helpful for you to see from me, to know that we're moving in the right direction?
Well,
Yeah.
Okay, so most people don't know whether they are visually able to do this or not. I've just worked with a lot of people, so this is how I know I'm not able to do this. I think most people think that they can do it, but they actually can't.
I think that's true too.
If I was to work with you, I would probably give you a mood board type deal and say, this is kind of the vibe I want.
Oh, I like that. That would be helpful. Rachel Spangler did that one time with one of her books, and it really was useful because it was, I don't know if it was like a Pinterest thing or, whatever she had done, but, she sent me a link to it and I went up there and looked, and it really was informative. I mean, it really helped me think, okay, at least this is how she understands, what the story in her book is about. These are the big motifs. These are the themes. These are the kinds of images that resonated for her. And then I was able to take those and come up with a creative solution Because it is like a puzzle. It's a lot like solving a puzzle, finding the right combination of pieces that fit together and, make something that's evocative of what this book does.
No, designers find it very difficult to work with me because I give them a kind of a feeling I want and then make them go away and do something. And then only afterwards I can say, okay, no, it needs to be angrier or it needs to be whatever it is, right?
But that would be helpful. If you came back to me and said this needs to be angrier, I would know what that meant. I would know visually how to try to start getting at that. I would just channel my mother. One of the other challenges I think that exists for many authors, probably particularly for authors who self-publish, is cost. We talked a little bit about audiobooks and how expensive they are to produce and where that, what that equalization point is, where you recover your upfront costs to do it, and then you actually start making money. And the same thing is true for, not just for a publisher, but for an individual who's putting out their own book. They got to pay all the freight. They got to pay somebody to typeset it and somebody to proofread it and, maybe somebody to edit it. And then they have to pay to have a cover designed unless they do it on their own. And all that stuff really adds up. And then there are the peripheral expenses, like how much does it cost to get the piece of stock art? Well, they have to pay that. If they work with me, they're going to get a break because I have a subscription account with Getty Images and I don't mark the art up. It's more of a pass-through cost. All of that stuff really adds up and there are just, for a lot of people, it's just prohibitive. What can you realistically charge? What does the market bear? When do you price yourself out? In my case, my goal is to try to do things that raise all the boats in the harbor. Not just make one really good cover, but hopefully help enough people get hopefully better and more thoughtfully designed covers that will lift our whole genre up. Because my hope is that if we get better at how we present ourselves, a lot of times what's inside the cover is without blemish. And those books deserve to have absolutely the best looking front door they can have.
Oh, absolutely. Without a decent cover, you're never going to cross it into mainstream, and we have to.
And we have to, because the stories we're telling are important and they matter. So I do this because I want to help people, get that. I want to help them get the attention and the notice and the recognition they ought to have. So I try not to charge too much. I certainly don't charge what I could be charging, but gosh, then I would do no work because people just can't afford it.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about the technical aspects of printing and where you're going to display and how the images relate and all that stuff.
Yeah, there are some nuances there. Like if you're gonna hire somebody to work on your cover, talk with them on the front end about how you're going to have the book produced. If it's going to go straight to ebook only and you're not going to do print, the cover designer should know that. Because one of the things that tells me, and that doesn't happen very often, most people will do paperbacks at some level, even if they're just print on demand. But when you're doing things that are only going to be viewed on a computer screen or on a phone, you can get away with so much more than you can in print. For one thing, you're working in a different color space. You're working in RGB. And RGB, because that's the color space that a computer monitor lives in. That's how it's like the difference between additive and subtractive color, which nobody needs to understand. But when you're dealing with things that are only going to be viewed on, like, let's say an artificial medium, a phone, a screen, you can use outrageous colors that are bright and almost neon, and they're going to keep that integrity. That's not going to change. Well, if you design that for the ebook, and then you have to translate that into a CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black color space for printing, because things that go on paper live in a different color space than things that are backlighted on a monitor, there's no equalizer. That printed piece is not going to look like the ebook cover.
Unless you want to pay for the Pantones.
Well, even the Pantones, ink is not light. You know what I mean? It's not pixels. You know, one is additive, one is subtractive. They have different primary colors. You know, so if I do a cover and I use like a flaming lime green, which I used on Rachel Spangler's book, Love All, is a black and white photograph with that bright lime green type at the top. In the ebook, that color just vibrated. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to look like a tennis ball that was coming at your face. And then when I had to translate that design to CMYK to print the paperbacks, those colors flatten right out. They just flatten right out. And even using a spot color doesn't make any difference because ink on paper does not react the same way as light on a computer screen. It's just totally different. So you need to know those things on the front end, and you need to make sure. One of the things that I do when I'm designing a cover, I toggle back and forth between the color spaces. Like I create the design in RGB and then I'll toggle to CMYK and see what happens to it. And invariably, it's almost like you take like a sheer curtain or something and put it on top of the design, because everything just gets darker and flatter. It just does. And then that's where you really have to go to work. You know, as a designer, you have to learn the tricks and the things that exist for you that you can do that are going to try to recreate the way the thing looked originally. I spend hours doing that.
Do you consider the fact that on the Kindle, the cover's all black and white? Yeah. I think that kind of sucks. I mean, and I know that that's really a function of the device and not the medium. You know, if you've got like a paper white or whatever they're called, you know, it just doesn't have the ability to render color. But it is good to know that. Like if someone tells me, I want to make sure that the cover you design is going to render well when it's converted to black and white. You know, in fact, I don't know that anyone has ever asked me to do that, but they should. You know, they should ask me to go ahead and make them a black and white version of their cover. Because when I do that, you know, we put a lot of times at Bywater, we'll put ads in the backs of our books for other titles. And I have to do it for those. I've got to go and take the original color file and adjust it so it has good midtones and good contrast and doesn't just turn into this blob that's sitting there. So that's a good question. Okay, so what are common mistakes and how do you avoid them?
There are two that I would identify. I think the most common mistakes are trying to pack too many elements onto a cover. You know, trying to show too much, trying to tell everything you know about the story in a cover image instead of just trying to communicate one thing. Because trying to communicate one thing is always going to work better for you. And you should push yourself to figure out what that one thing is.
And ideally, whatever that one thing is, it needs to emote something in the viewer.
It does. What emotion do you want them to have? You know, like you talked about, maybe I want this to look angrier, or maybe I want it to be, you know, optimistic or poignant, or maybe it's about somebody who's recovering from great loss. You know, there are things you can do that will speak to that, you know, that might be a simple image that still speaks to hope or promise. So I think the most common mistakes would be trying to put too much on there, trying to overlay the cover with too much detail, which no one's going to get. No one's ever going to get that. The only one who would ever get that is the author, which is a good reason for a lot of times why the author needs to be involved, but they shouldn't drive the process because they're too close to the content. The author should recuse, And then the second greatest pitfall is appropriate typography. You want to have typography that works, not just with the content of the cover, with what the book is about, but that's readable, that's clear, that's accessible, that is readable at full size and is readable at a thumbnail size, which by definition means you need to pare things down and make them simpler. I have a great example of, I remember this from 100 years ago. I was working for a college in Greensboro, about an hour from here. And I used to have to go and do on-press checks for big printing projects. And, they would start running these jobs and they would run them 24 hours a day. And when they had a new form ready, they would just call you. If it was 3:00 in the morning, you got up, you got in your car, you drove over there. You went in and you stood and you looked and you checked the color and all this other jazz. Well, I had a back way that I would go back and forth to this printing company, and it was almost always in the middle of the night. And there was this one place on the outskirts of the city that I would pass. And it was this ramshackle, just beat up business that repaired cracked diesel engine blocks for trucks. So some big truck blows the head gasket and then you send the whole engine in and this place fixes it. They machine it, they do whatever. Out in front, they had giant engine hoists, with halves of big truck engines hanging there. And the name of this business was Greensboro Diesel Crack Repair. That was the name of the company. Their sign, I'm not making this up, their sign was in wedding script. So I would see that and I'd be like, who thought that made sense? There's this fussy little with all these curly cues, and then you look at what they do, so to me, that was always my kind of mantra for making sure that the font choice really fits, the content of what you're doing. So I see covers many times done by other designers who do lots and lots and lots of covers. And, sometimes I'll look at one and think, wow, they nailed that. That image is perfect, but oh my word, that typeface is horrible. Sometimes I think that's a function of the computer. I really do. I think that computers have just across the board desensitized us so that we don't think as deeply about those questions as we once did. It's just kind of I'll just type it in there and the way the letters display is the way they display, rather than kind of looking at it and saying, wow, I could park a Buick between the first two, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to tighten this up and I'm going to, mess with the letters to get them exactly right so they nest exactly the way they should. To me, those are the two big ones. Too many elements and poor typography.
I can see a case for that.
What would you say?
Selling the wrong concept is something that I struggle with covers. So images that evoke the wrong emotion. So you expect a book that's going to take you on a horror ride, and you get a book that's actually a romance with a slight horror theme.
I gotcha. Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, that's pretty serious. And you wonder too, I know it's a temptation for some people, and it might just be a function of economy to use a cover design service. And they're out there, any cover is $100 or whatever. And there are just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And you scroll through and pick one that you think, oh, this one's cool. And it just says your name, your title, and it already has the image, and you just get the book and put your name where it says your name and your title, and you're done. So I think there's probably, there's a real danger there too, that you're going to end up with things that don't exactly speak to what your book is really about.
Definitely. All right, so let's talk about, now you've got your cover and you're happy with your cover, and how are you using it in your marketing? What can you suggest?
I think there's a lot of missed opportunities. Like, I know it's becoming popular for many authors to, when, maybe they have a book page or an author page, like on Facebook, or, they have Twitter accounts that are specific to their writing versus their personal. But I do think it's really good to think in terms of having a synergy among all of those platforms. If you're going to use whatever your new release is to kind of drive your marketing effort, if you want to tailor everything around what you've created, then it behooves you on the front end to talk with somebody about creating that family of materials for you. I want a cover, I want an ebook, I want a paperback, I want an audiobook cover, I want a Facebook cover image, I want a cover image for my Twitter feed, I want a couple of web ads. So, that's one thing that I would suggest. And you can do that. Particularly if you're like a Melissa Braden, Georgia Beers, and you're so well branded so that people can pick your books out of a police lineup. They have great opportunities to have those things created, and whatever their new book is always going to be consistent and fit right in. So I would try to do that. And I think that becomes especially important if you get into branding. If you want to brand yourself as an author, then you want to make sure that you consistently carry that brand through.
And you absolutely want to do that because it gives you professionalism that otherwise you're lacking.
I think so. And I like doing that for people. I don't have a lot of authors who really ask me to do things beyond just their covers. Periodically someone will come and say, do me a Facebook cover, do me a series of ads, create a postcard, do this, do that, It's a great thing to do.
You're listening to The Lesbian Talk Show. TheLesbianTalkShow.com, your hub of podcast information.
It's like almost like a catchphrase that sometimes appears on covers. So it's like a cover title and then a little thing saying, John saves the world from zombies, or whatever it is. Those little funny things. Do you work with them? Do you recommend them? Do you not?
I have used them in the past because authors have asked me to include that as an element. I find those things to be somewhat cumbersome. And again, because they're usually not very intelligible at a really small size, stuff like that tends to just fall off. And I will sometimes try to push people to migrate content like that to the back cover, or to the blurb. If somebody's going to click on your cover to get more information, then you want John is going to save the world from zombies, to be like the biggest thing. So that's kind of, I think about those the way I think about subtitles. Like if you have to tack one on, maybe what you need is a better title.
Okay.
But that's just my opinion.
Designing ebook covers is very different from designing print covers, also because you have the back cover and the spine.
Yeah, and it's hard for me to imagine why so many people think the back cover is just a throwaway. And that's not unusual. That's not unusual in the industry, that there are many authors and many publishers who really do next to nothing with the back covers. And I don't know whether that's because they don't expect to sell very many paperbacks versus the large quantities of ebooks. They might move so they don't really worry about the back cover. But to me, it's a big piece of real estate and it really needs to do some work for you. So I, except when I'm directed not to, when the back cover of a book is proscribed and has to look exactly the same way, and I can't do anything with it, I always try to design the back cover. I think of it as an extension of what's on the front, because to me, the greatest thing in the world is when somebody picks the book up and turns it over, because you've almost got them, right?
Yes, so because I'm not even convinced people necessarily read all the text on the back cover. I think they may read the first couple of lines, but look at the image overall, and it's at that point that pushes the sale.
I think so too, and they might drop their eye down and read the bio of the author, and if it says Rachel Spangler is the author of 14 novels, and forgive me, I don't know the exact. I know it's a lot. But, I mean, you might go, oh yeah, I read that one. I really loved it. Or at the top, you have praise for, and it would either be the last book they wrote, that says her command of the English language is that her characters come to life and leap from the page and blah, blah, blah. And you recognize the names. If it says Tara Scott, the Lesbian Review, I know I'm going to buy it, So that kind of stuff really does matter. And I think that, and no designer should charge you to do that. Like, you hire me to do your book cover, you're going to get the back designed. That's part of it. You get the front, you get the back, you get the spine, you get the high-res JPEG for the ebook. I'll do the audio cover for next to nothing if you need one, so I just think all of that, I think it's a real missed opportunity if you don't design the back.
And the spine, because so often it's sitting in the bookcase with the spine out, and that's in bookstores, that's in all these visible areas. So your friend comes over and all they see is the spine. You have an opportunity to sell this book to your friend as well.
And how do you do that? You do that by making sure that they can, A, read what's on the spine, which should inform the typeface you use. And that's when it becomes really valuable, I think, to try to brand the name of the author. And you have to make a decision about which thing you want to dominate on the spine. Is it the title? Is it the author's name? There's always going to be some kind of publisher imprint logo. And this is another thing that I do. I also design logos. I mean, I don't just do book covers. I do everything, and when I work on logo designs and imprint designs for publishers, I give them every conceivable permutation of a logo they could possibly need. Vertical, horizontal, square, color, black and white, just a symbol that doesn't have any writing, something like that, so that you can, some publishers do an excellent job with their brand, Bella, Bold Strokes, Bywater, I think, I think, and Ilva, I think too, but they do a really good job so that if you see a little yellow, box with a BB, on it, it's a Bella book. If you see the triangle, it's a Bold Strokes, at Bywater, you see the little lighthouse. So I think those things really matter too. You don't just take your full size logo, from the back and try to squeeze it into this tiny little spine, because it's not going to look like anything.
No. And branding of publishing houses is important. I know that the big publishing houses in the sector are more likely to pick up their books than some unknown publishing house.
Yeah, because you feel like, okay, you probably understand that they meet certain thresholds for editing, for production, that there's probably a greater likelihood that you're going to like the book or at least respect the way the book was produced, because you have that understanding about what they put out. Some of the other things that are interesting to have to think about when you approach a cover is the way some publishers now, the publisher brands the cover. So it's not just the author brand, where they have like a part of their logo or something appears prominently on the front.
Like Bold Strokes does that.
And, I understand the reason for that. As a designer, I don't really like having to work around that, because I feel like that actually pulls you out of, I guess it depends on the editorial voice that you want to have. And I understand perfectly the need to let a potential buyer know immediately, for the reasons we just identified, that this is a book from this publisher, and that should tell you these top level things. So maybe having that on there works on that level. As a designer and not as an author, I have to say that I really don't like working around those, because usually those things they occupy a certain color space that conflicts with, and you have to be really careful about the placement of other elements so that you don't run into that, all that jazz. But I do appreciate why it's there.
I think it's the same theory as why you brand a Steven Spielberg film as a Steven Spielberg film.
Exactly. It's exactly the same thing. Yeah, I agree.
And is there anything else you feel we need to cover?
I don't know. Like, can I actually ever say anything that's not a compound sentence? No, I mean, I thank you. This has been wonderful, and it's been a great exercise for me to actually have to sit and think about this stuff. Because you know how it is, right? You just, you kind of just do things, and sometimes you don't step back and remind yourself of why you make the choices you make.
It's why I like having conversations like this, is because you can sit and ponder the greater things in life.
Well, one could only hope that a good cover is one of the great things in life. I happen to believe it.
It definitely is. Okay, and so where can people find you, and what do they need to do if they want something designed by you?
Oh, well, the easiest way to find me is to email me, annmcman@gmail.com. You can send me a Facebook message. Sometimes I go up there. If you ask Lynn Ames, I go about twice a year. But just email me, send me a message, ask me. And, one thing we didn't talk about is how much time you should allow. At what point in the process. I think once your book is maybe in its final sort of editorial flow, and you have a pretty clear sense that nothing epic about the book is going to change, that's a great time to begin talking about a cover. I know that there are many people whose processes are so fast that there's never a bunch of lead time, that they pretty much go from, I finished writing it, it's going to come out next month. But then there are other places like Bywater, and I'm sure Bold Strokes and Bella and Ilva and some of the Sapphire and some of the other Desert Palm, and they work more ahead so that at any one time they're working on books that are going to come out next year. So they have a lot more time. But I think as soon as you know that your book is kind of in the can in terms of what it's going to be, it's a great time to begin talking about it. I don't know about other designers. I work really fast. Generally, if somebody approaches me and needs a cover, I hope nobody comes up and, bites me on the butt for this. But for the most part, I usually turn them around in a couple weeks. So it's pretty fast, unless we have to go in and do rounds and rounds of changes. But I think that in a perfect world, you should give your designer 30 to 60 days to do it. And to me, that's a generous amount of time, depending on what that person's workload is like. It's usually not good to approach somebody about creating a cover 2 weeks before the publication date. So you might want to give yourself a little more latitude than that. But anyway, I work fast. Just shoot me an email and ask. And I almost never say no, unless it's just something that I know is a bad fit for me. And I'm honest about that. There are just some things I won't be good at.
Your design company is called TreeHouse Studio.
It is. TreeHouse Studio.
And you design everything.
I do everything. I do book covers. I do logos. I do, branding packages, brochures. I do a tremendous amount. I do fundraising materials. I work for a lot of nonprofits, a lot of them, because I just like to. I also do a lot of pro bono stuff. I do a lot of design work for Lambda Literary and a lot for Golden Crown Literary Society as a volunteer, because I think that's the right thing to do. I'm also a real sucker if you're doing a book, an anthology or something, and you're trying to raise money for a cause. I really try to work with people on that, and not charge. If they're not going to make any money, then, and they're trying to raise money to benefit something, a scholarship or whatever, I like to try to collaborate on those also.
Fabulous.
That's all for this week, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
I'm Sheena, and this has been The Great Cover-Up with Ann McMan. You can find links to Ann McMan's online presence in the show notes, as well as a link to our Patreon page. If you love the content we create and want to support us, that's where you go. It's patreon.com/The Lesbian Talk Show. Not only can you help us expand our shows, but you get exclusive content too. That's all for today. Bye.